Alright, how's it going everyone? Welcome to my equipment guide for World of Tanks. So, if you're into the game, basically what equipment is it's these things that you will find here that you are able to mount on all your vehicles, and they will give you benefits to your vehicle's performance in-game. So, these three slots right under here, they'll give you a menu of equipment that you can select for your tank, and you can purchase equipment for a large sum of credits. Now, equipment is a very important thing to have on all your vehicles, especially all your high-tier vehicles. I would recommend not playing any high-tier vehicles without full and proper equipment setups. Okay, so here's all the equipment that's in the game. You can mount on your vehicles. There are two types of equipment. There's normal equipment and complex equipment. So standard normal equipment, you can take it on and off tanks without a charge. The complex equipment, you'll have to pay 10 gold to remove it from your tank, or you can just destroy it. So I'll go through all the types of equipment here and talk about them. First off, we have enhanced coil springs. Like, this is basically just enhances your suspension, your tracks of your tank. It's not a viable piece of equipment. It's terrible. You do not want to use it on any tank in the game. It's not useful compared to the other pieces of equipment. So moving on, we have vents. Now, improved ventilation will give you a 5% bonus to all your crew skills. This means that your reload will go down, your aim time will go down, accuracy will improve, your view range will improve, your traverse speed will improve. So it basically just is a sort of like carpet bombing of all your crew skills and improves everything on your tank. It's a great piece of equipment. You'll use it on a lot of tanks. A light spall liner, that'll basically just make your tank slightly more durable. It's completely useless. You don't want to use it on like anything in the game. Camouflage net. Now, the camouflage net will make your vehicle harder to spot once you have been stationary for 3 seconds. If you've been stationary for 3 seconds, the camo net will activate. It'll display in game that it's activated. But once you move your tracks, you can turn your turret and it'll still stay activated. But once you turn your tracks, camouflage net will no longer be active. So it's completely useless if your vehicle is in motion. Now, people will say you want to use this on TDs and RD and light tanks. I would not. It's just like not very useful unless you're sitting still for a long periods of time and do not and are gonna get spotted without it. There's other equipment that you would want to mount on those vehicles before camouflage net. So camouflage net is basically a no-go on almost all tanks. Now, vents again, more torsion bars, same thing. Wet ammo rack. So wet ammo rack will give you a plus 50% to your ammo rack durability. This means you're gonna get your ammo rack damage less, and you're gonna get basically your ammo rack destroyed. Your turret's not gonna fly off, and you're not gonna die. But it's really not very valuable, considering that other equipment will be much more useful on these tanks. There are a lot of tanks in the game that get ammo racked a lot, but on those tanks, what you're just going to do is just going to put the crew skill safe stowage on, and you're not going to need this. It's just kind of a waste of a slot. I would not ever mount a wet ammo rack. More coil springs, same thing. Spall liner, the same thing, useless. Gun rammer. So a gun rammer is the most important piece of equipment in the game, period. It gives you a minus 10% to your loading time. That is literally best piece of equipment you can get. It'll just make you shoot faster, more damage. It's the best piece of equipment by far. If there's a tank that can mount a rammer, you just need to mount a rammer on that tank. There's no question about it. Some people will say, oh, my tank shoots really fast already. No, you need a rammer. A rammer, it's very important, best piece of equipment in the game. All your tanks that can mount it should mount it. These are just the same as hand suspension, don't mount that. Binocular telescope. So a binocular telescope, like the Camo-net, only comes into effect once you've been stationary for 3 seconds. When you've been stationary for 3 seconds, you'll get a 25% view range to your vehicle. Not very useful on medium tanks or light tanks. What you're going to put this on is tank destroyers mainly. Now, I don't put on medium tanks because they're moving around a lot of time. Light tanks, you're moving around a lot of the time. TDs, you're sitting still a lot of the time, and TDs already have semi-poor view range, so the 25% is needed for them to be able to spot. So binocular telescope, basically some tank destroyers will mount this. But what you're going to mainly be mounting is these coated optics. So these coated optics, they give you a 10% view range, but the difference between them and Binocs is they'll be active at all times, whether you're moving, shooting, sitting still. So they are basically much more useful than the binocular telescope in most situations. And for coated optics, you should put coated optics on all your light tanks. A lot of your medium tanks, so put coated optics on. It's a really good piece of equipment. Now, cyclone filter, useless. It'll just make your engine more durable. It's just a waste of a slot. Enhanced gun laying drive. Now, this basically gives you 10% your aiming speed, but it's only active when your tank is sitting still. So some TDs, it'll be useful. Long aiming TDs, I mean, like an artillery, it'll be useful. But a lot of other tanks, I wouldn't mount this, since it's only when you're sitting still. It's only 10%. But it's a decent piece of equipment. Like some longer heavy tanks, you might mount it. TDs maybe, but yeah, so it's pretty decent. This will basically fill tanks with CO2. Basically, you'll get set on fire a little bit less. It's not really useful. Don't mount that. We've already looked at those. Toolbox. So toolbox will give you a plus 25% to repair speed. Like the only thing you'll really put this on is maybe like a heavy tank, but you'll probably have a repair crew skill train, so you'll already have a good repair speed, and there'll be other equipment that you'll want to put on that tank that'll be better than the toolbox. So toolbox, it's really, I wouldn't put on almost any tank in the game, not very useful. Okay, so vertical stabilizer, this is perhaps the second most important piece of equipment on any tank, besides after the gun rammer. Basically, it gives you 20% accuracy during movement and turret rotation, so this is going to make your tank so much more flexible, and you're almost always going to be turning your turret or moving when you're shooting unless you're firing at a stationary target. So this is an extremely important piece of equipment. It's going to make your aiming reticle much smaller. You're gonna hit a lot more shots. So it's basically a must-have on any medium tank, light tank, or even heavy tank that can mount it. So a very important piece of equipment. And the rest, we've already covered these. So we'll move on to tanks and their different setups for each class. Alright, so we'll start off with heavy tank setup. So here is the Conqueror. It's a heavy tank. The first piece of equipment is definitely going to be that gun rammer. It's most important. Improve your DPM. Very important. So gun rammer. The next thing I have on here is a vertical stabilizer. This basically just makes my tank's aiming circle smaller, and it makes me more accurate. I'll hit more shots. It's very important. And the third thing that I've gone for is vents. So this will basically just make my tank better in a number of ways. So that's what I've gone for. You could change the vents for like optics. That's an option. But I thought vents would be the best because it gives you the basically just benefits to everything. So that's what I've gone on for this heavy tank. On the IS-3 I've gone for the same thing, except I've changed vents with the gun laying drive. You can do that on some heavy tanks where you have a long aiming time, but if I were to set up my IS-3 again, I would choose vents instead of the gun laying drive. So on almost all heavy tanks, you're going to choose the rammer, vertical stabilizer, and vents. So that's pretty standard. Super purging, it's classified as a medium, but it's really a heavy, so I've gone with the same thing. Alright, so we'll move on to medium tanks next. Okay, so here's the T-54. This is a very classic medium tank, sort of a very standard type of medium tank. I've gone with the rammer, of course, very important, and the vertical stabilizer, even more important on a medium tank than it is on a heavy. It's extremely important for doing the types of things that you'll be doing in a medium tank. And the third piece of equipment is again the vent, so this is exactly the same as my heavy tank setup. Now, I've gone for vents on this tank just because I go in for insane DPM with the food. The extra combat rations lowers your aim time as well. I mean, not your aim time, your reload, and the Brothers in Arms skill, or the Sisterhood of Steel in this case, will lower my reload. so I basically just gone for an insane reload. But what you can do, and what a lot of good players do, will put coated optics instead of the vents. Now this will give your tank basically more ability to spot. It'll give you like a slightly more flexibility late game when you're trying to spot. So on your medium tanks, it's basically you're just going to be choosing between vents and optics. But the first two, the rammer, the vertical stabilizer, those are you're definitely going to have those if you can mount them. Now for an autoloader medium, like the Batchat for example, it cannot mount a rammer since it's an autoloader. It has a drum magazine. So it does not have a gun rammer as an option. So on this one, we've gone with coated optics, because the Batchat, you need to have that great view range or spotting. Gone with the vents for even more view range, less aim time, just helps everything. And then the vertical stabilizer, of course. Now, what I used to play with on the Batchat is actually a gun laying drive instead of the vents. Just because the Batchat has quite a long aim time, and it's good to help with having less exposure when you're aiming. But I found vents are probably more useful. On Object 140, another medium, I have the same setup that I have on the T54, the rammer, vertical stabilizer, and vents. Vents are basically interchangeable with the coated optics, but those are going to be the only ones you're going to be using. So on a medium tank, you're going to have a rammer, a vertical stabilizer, coated optics, or vents. Okay, so light tanks are very similar to medium tanks, in that they have the vertical stabilizer, vents, and coated optics. Since this is a autoloader light tank, I cannot mount a gun rammer. If it could mount a gun rammer, I would have. But on a standard light tank, you're going to go with a gun rammer, vertical stabilizer, because you're going to be on the move a lot in a light tank, and coated optics. Now on light tanks, coated optics do outclass vents just because light tanks are all about the view range. So on a light tank, you're going to go with that. Coated optics, vertical stabilizer, and a rammer. Since I could not mount a rammer on this tank, it's not an option since it has an autoloader or a drum magazine. I've gone with the ventilations instead. But on most light tanks, you're going to have a rammer, optics, and the vertical stabilizer. So here on the E25, on this tank destroyer, I've gone with the gun rammer, of course, ventilation, and binocular telescope. So this tank cannot mount a vertical stabilizer. TDs generally can't. So I've gone with the vents, and then I've gone with the binocular telescope for that increased view range over coated optics, since in a tank destroyer you have poor view range, so the 25% bonus is really what makes the difference, and you'll be sitting still a lot in a tank destroyer. On tank destroyers, you can go with enhanced gun lane drive. That'll be useful on a lot of higher tier tank destroyers with longer aim times, so you could use that over your vents. But mainly the things you will be using on a tank destroyer are binos, maybe optics if it has a good view range or something like that. But binos, rammer, vents, and or gun lane drive. So finally, I'll just talk briefly about artillery. Now, I don't even have a single artillery piece in my garage, but if I did, I would set it up with a SBG rammer. Since artillery, you have a very long reload, you want to get the reload down. I would want to have a gun laying drive, since the aiming time is going to be so long on an artillery, and I would want to have ventilation just to get improved aim time, improved reload. So that is what I would put on an artillery. I wouldn't bother with like a camouflage net or binoculars, because if you're gonna get spotted, you're gonna die. So that's what I'd go with an artillery, basically just everything to improve the gun handling. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed this quick guide. Please leave in the comments if you would like to see more guides for things like ammo loadouts, consumables, crew skills, or anything like that. But until next time, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.